from the Denver Broncos Media Center, welcome to Broncos Country Tonight with Ryan Edwards and Benjamin Allbright.
Welcome to Broncos Country Tonight. Getting excited about what the Broncos are going to be adding later this week as the NFL Draft is just on the horizon. Benjamin Allbright will be putting out his first-round mock coming out on KOAColorado.com. You can check that out, or at Allbright NFL. But one of the things I want to talk about today, I think a lot of emphasis gets put on what the Broncos are going to do at 64, pick 75, 96, so on and so forth. I want to sort of talk about the pockets of talent in this draft. Right, where are the sections you think the Broncos are going to be coming away with the players that they like the most? So speaking of edge rushers first, right, that's the topic that everybody wants to get into. Edge rushers for the Broncos. We know there are a lot of really talented ones, especially in the top 100. What's the best pocket for that group, in your opinion? Well,
this draft as a whole is kind of fat in the middle, between that second and that fifth round, and I think that's where you're going to look for that kind of talent. I think that the bulk of the talent in this draft is really kind of in there. There's some outliers you can find a little bit later at some of the other positions. You could probably, for instance, get a receiver or a corner in like the 6th or 7th round. But if you're looking for a right tackle, an edge rusher, things like that, you probably need to get those in that 2nd and 5th round, because it's where the real viable potential starting talent is versus the guys that you're really rolling the dice on a flyer. Specifically with the edge rusher. I mean, it's a deep class, but there's a cap to it. And I think if you don't have an edge rusher or two by the end of the 4th round, you're kind of out of luck.
No, I think that's exactly right. I think that's why when we get into what the Broncos could or should do there at 64 or even pick 75, we are including edge rusher as the target spot there, because you can find guys that have starting talent. At least that's what we believe based on a projection. Let's go inside linebacker here, because there's several inside linebackers that I think we see mocked in that 2nd, maybe even the 3rd round. But there's also some guys that you could get into maybe the 4th round there. So what's your favorite pocket of inside linebackers?
Well, we talked a lot on this show and on the radio show about both Chad Muma and Troy Anderson. I think Muma might even be gone by 64, but that's probably his range as far as that goes. Troy Anderson, you can probably get a little later. You can probably get him in the 70s to 90s, and I think that is the pocket. I think that if you're looking for that kind of player, you have to hope nobody else gets super excited about that guy and jumps you for him. But I think you can kind of try to play the patience game and see what you can do about, kind of waiting back until you get to that spot and let him land in your lap without having to give up extra assets to go get him.
Let's stay on the defensive side of the ball for a couple more here. Cornerback. That's one we brought up a lot. You specifically have brought up a lot. It's interesting with the corners. I sort of feel like the talented corner really does last into day 3. It's a pretty strong group in that respect, but it's really spread out, right? I mean, you have the couple, 2 or 3 top tier guys that are going to go in the 1st round. You have a couple guys maybe that will get looks in the 2nd round, a couple in the 3rd, but it feels like the Broncos, they don't have to reach. They don't have to be desperate for a cornerback, because most of the time, especially once they get to where the Broncos are picking initially, you're going to be looking at developmental guys anyways.
Well, yeah, and so that's the thing. If you're looking for a corner at that point, they're probably going to have some special teams value, somebody that contributes there, maybe even return value as well, and try and figure that out. I don't think you're going to find too many good scheme fit coverage corner right off the bat, ready to go type guys in this draft, unless you're looking day 1, day 2. The day 3 guys are all flawed to some degree, or have something that you would say this is probably not a day 1 starter. You don't really want them to be a day 1 starter, because they're probably going to be a work in progress. So that said, and I do think corner is very important, I don't feel like that's going to be one of the first positions they take unless somebody like McCreary just happens to fall to 64, in which case they would sprint to the podium and throw the card at Roger Goodell.
Yeah, if Roger McCreary from Auburn is there, that's an easier one. I think a couple of the guys, Cam Taylor-Britt from Nebraska, is going to go in that range. But if we're getting into the 3rd round, for example, 4th round, so on and so forth, Zion McCollum from Sam Houston State had that perfect 10 RAS. We know that George Payton tends to like those guys with the high RAS score. You could get into a couple other ones that I like here. Joshua Williams out of Fayetteville State. Kobe Bryant out of Cincinnati is another name to kind of keep in mind. But again, even into day 3, there's quite a few players even further down. Chase Lucas from Arizona State. There's guys down in that day 3 range. Martin Emerson from Mississippi State. I know we haven't said always the most positive things about him, but if I'm taking him on day 3, I love that pick. Mm-hmm. So there's guys that I think feel like the Broncos, if you understand what you're looking for in a developmental prospect and don't have high expectations of him being a starter in year one, which again, when you're taking guys in this range anyways, you don't usually have that expectation. I think that's where you could take really some great value with the cornerback position specifically. Yeah,
I agree. And I agree with the list of names you put out as well. I think that, with what you have in terms of depth on the corner, on the roster right now, I think that's the idea. Now, the problem is that unexpected injuries occur, and you never know who's going to get thrust into a job. But when you've got a roster that consists of Darby and Surtain, K1 Williams, and Ojemudia and Bassie and K-Jack in a limited role, I think you can afford to bring people in like that are a bit more of a high upside developmental type that you're not counting on for high productivity year one, and kind of work them into your system and have them ready for year two.
All right, let's go to the offensive side of the ball. We'll talk about offensive tackles because we think the Broncos will likely come away with an offensive tackle in this draft. Where do you like the pocket the best to grab an offensive tackle where you don't feel desperate for it?
Probably a little later than most people, actually. I think there's some decent – if you're going to get a guy, you're probably going to get an upside guy that you're going to have to work on. And there's some guys, kid out of North Dakota, I think that I think are would be good additions that you can get on day three. I think you've got enough guys that are bodies that can play that position right now on the roster that you'd be okay with that. And so I'd like to see them look at that on day three, somewhere in the 4th to 7th round, and kind of look for a guy they feel like they can coach up in there.
Yeah, there's some guys in there: Max Mitchell, Kellen Deich, a couple guys to throw in there. Dare Rosenthal out of Kentucky. I think I don't
think Deich will be there on day 3, but yeah.
Yeah, well, but I mean, these are guys that are sort of projected. Matt Waletzko out of North Dakota is another name.
He's one to kind of circle.
Yeah. So, again, for the Broncos, who are not desperate for offensive tackle because they made the additions that they did during free agency, then you are in position where you could take somebody understanding they are developmental. It's really kind of about those tiers, because if you are in second round, third round, if a Tyler Smith falls into your lap, well, that's one of those very easy decisions that you can make. The guy at Tulsa, who I think really should be a first rounder.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm a big fan of Tyler Smith. But I think if you're not going to get one of the major guys, one of the major ones doesn't fall in your lap, then I think that the idea would be to just wait a little bit longer. There is some value there on day 3 when everybody else is snapping up other things that you can kind of get a guy you've got your eyes on.
And we feel similarly about interior offensive line. There really are only like probably 3 guys that are probably going to go in that first round range. Mm-hmm. I'd say day 2 is going to be I think it's going to be pretty thin at the interior offensive line. I think the spot really is day 3.
Yeah, same here. There's 3 guys you're looking at probably in the whole of the first 2 rounds. And then after that, there 1 or 2 other guys. I think there's probably 5 or 6 viable guys that'll be there on day 3 that you don't even have to really go with those first 10 picks in the 4th round. You can kind of wait a little bit. So,
one position, last one here, running back, that we think the Broncos are going to add at some point. Where would you target your running back?
I guess it depends on who you value and what you think it's going to take. And I think that they'll probably go running back earlier than people think. Interestingly, the Vegas odds makers have linebacker and running back as the top positions for the Broncos in their first 2 picks. So Vegas certainly seems to think that running back is going to be a priority for the Broncos. I think if you want James Cook, you probably have to reach a little bit, go a little bit earlier. If you want to wait on a guy like a Hassan Haskins, you could probably get him early in the 4th. I think that it just depends on which one really caught your eye.
For me, day 3, 4th round specifically, because I got those 2 picks in the 4th round. That would be a great spot for me to take one of those running backs. I think Zamir White, Kyron Williams out of Notre Dame, Brian Robinson out of Alabama. I think all those guys, Rashad White might even still be there, out of Arizona State. I just feel like there's just so many talented running backs. Hassan Haskins, you mentioned him. I'd even talk about Tyler Beatty out of Missouri. Just so many talented running backs right there on the beginning of the 4th round and the 5th round. It seems like a great spot for the Broncos, and especially with those 2 back-to-back picks there, they could really do some damage.
And that's generally where I want you to take a running back, but they may view or value another guy higher than that, so wouldn't be surprised.
Like last year with Javonte Williams.
Yeah, wouldn't be surprised if they took one earlier than we thought.
Yeah, but they will need to add that along with several other positions, and I think this is an interesting exercise, and I know the Broncos are probably doing the same thing where they're taking a look at where the runs on these players might actually occur, because when you're picking for your first pick at 64, you have to let the board sort of fall to you. There's not really much you can do about that. And same with many picks after that, is you have to sort of watch the runs on certain positions and say, okay, we want to be part of that tier of players, or we can wait on that tier of players. And I think that's why this exercise is so valuable.
Well, you know what they say about tiers. You'll be crying them if you don't get your guy.
Is that what they say? I don't think Did you just make that up on the spot?
Oh, that's actually there's an in joke about that, about grouping players by tiers, and then you be in tiers by having them in the wrong one.
The other thing is you make up stuff all the time, and I sometimes I don't know if it's a joke that you're making, you're like being creative, or you're referencing a movie or a show that I've never seen, and
it's just a colloquialism.
Okay, all right. For Benjamin Allbright, I'm Ryan Edwards. Thanks for watching Broncos Country Tonight.